This means, yes, as you might have just gotten the notification, this means that please just take this into account when you participate, and yeah, be aware of that. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. We would like to have this session be as interactive as possible, so do feel free to share at any point. There's a raise your hand option, so you can use that to request to speak. I believe there's also a chat function which you can use as well. And it'd be nice when you are speaking if you could please turn on both your microphone, of course, but as well as your camera, just so that we get to see who you are. And maybe if you could just start out, please, by writing a short introduction of your name, your organization, and where you're based in the chat box. Thank you so much. So before we start off with our presentation of the GPA's work, we wanted to get a sense of who you are, who's in the audience. So we'll have a poll that will be brought up live shortly. So if you could just answer, who do you work for and what's your area of expertise? So we'll wait a second for you all to fill it in. And thank you also for the introductions in the chat. Give everyone a few more seconds to fill it out.
Megan, do you see the poll?
I can see the poll. Oh, do I have to fill it out too? No.
No, I have launched it, but I was just not sure if it's visible.
It is visible.
Okay. Can you make a vote or no?
Yep, I'll do that right now. Perfect. So I hope that we have some submissions to the poll. So is it possible to see the results now, hopefully?
I think for some reason it's not working, but...
Oh, no, it's come up. Perfect. Okay, great. Well, I see that we have a very strong focus on energy access when it comes to the areas of expertise, which is good to know. We also have some people joining from the climate sector, as well as wash, shelter, and livelihoods. And I see it's a wide, most of the audience members either work for one of the UN agencies or an NGO, but also a few private sector participants and government. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, and you'll be able to see in the chat the more detailed introductions of participants and who they work for exactly. Great. And with that, I'll hand over to my colleague, Mark Gibson, to set the scene.
Thanks, Megan. As you can see from the first slide, my name is Mark Gibson. I head up the GPA coordination unit at UNITAR in Geneva. So I just want to give you a very sort of brief overview of energy access in displacement settings. So I think this slide is really interesting. It sort of shows that we have an increasing number of people becoming displaced over a period of time. And at the end of 2022, there's around about 110 million people displaced globally, which was an increase of 19 million on the year before. And it's interesting to note that 76% of displaced people live in low and middle income countries, and that results in around 1 in 74 people globally are displaced. It's a significant number. So it is a topic that requires attention and something that we need to be focused on. So next. And what this slide is showing is that back in 2014, when work was done by Chatham House, we were showing that 77% of displaced communities didn't have access to clean cooking, and 89% of the displaced population didn't have access to sustainable electricity supplies. And then going forward, we did an update back in 2020, which shows that there was an increase of a number of people that didn't have access to clean cooking. That went up 4% to 81%. And again, with electricity, there was an increasing number of the populations not having access to electricity, and increased by 5% to 94%. I think that's really fair to say that it's not that it shows that we're not doing good work. It shows that we're doing good work, but we're not being able to keep pace with increasing numbers of displaced communities. So again, with increasing numbers, the problem is only increasing. We really need to be focused on this topic to drive down some of these numbers. I think one of the things that could support that activity is really sort of shifting away from short-term remedies and coming to more sustainable solutions where the enabling environment allows it to. So really, our sort of short-term focus is sort of based, on our historic traditional approaches early onset of an emergency. They're grant-based, sort of really focused on free distribution, and unfortunately, this sort of cause market distortion. There is also a sort of poor understanding of energy user needs. It's really much, there's a need for clean cooking. We need lighting, so we pour out lanterns and clean cook stoves without really engaging the end user on those. I think it's fair to say that operation and maintenance of the solutions that we roll out is little considered. We're really focused on, let's get these energy appliances or solutions out there, not really thinking about how do we maintain them to make sure there is longevity in the displacement settings. And okay, this sort of makes things unsustainable. When the grant money is turned off, so is the solution, and the sort of underlying system is unchanged. So we just remain with poor energy access. Just to go back on my own words, where we have an enabling environment, that looks at sort of rights to work, cash, it's called cash transactions, telephone-based transactions. It allows us to look at more permanent solutions that are sort of market-based, so that the private sector can come in and deliver them as sort of cheaper and quicker than traditional measures. And there might be a need of a grant to kick off sort of a blended finance solution, but essentially the innovative funding mechanisms in place allow that sort of solution to carry on and continue long after the money and the people have run out, because we do have solutions based on the end user solutions. And what this also does is sort of rely on the sort of support and leverage of the local system. So again, we're sort of building on the strengths of what's already there and leaving something stronger behind. And this really does require a sort of a mindset shift. And we have seen this starting to occur in this space since the GPA sort of officially launched back in 2019. So there's a lot more talk. There still needs to be a lot more action to deliver this mindset. Sadiq? Just very brief, those that don't know us at the GPA, you can read, our sort of statement there, but I think it's fair to say that we are a sort of a platform that's trying to deliver SDG 7 in displacement settings. This largely reliant on the concept of leaving no one behind, yet the sort of host nations of displaced communities aren't recording those communities within their numbers. So by definition, we are leaving people behind because we're not recording them. So we are looking to see how we can support host countries, the displaced communities directly, and other organizations that provide that support to provide affordable, reliable, and sustainable modern energy services. We are funded by a number of organisations, including the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, NORCAP, UK Aid, Federal Foreign Office, ICI and IKEA. And as you can see from the other sort of slides, we are steered by 16 organisations, which are sort of split evenly between the UN and international NGOs to provide us with direction and insight to be able to identify what support they need in changing this space. Thank you, Sadiq. And as I mentioned, it really is a sort of a convening body around the sort of humanitarian energy topic, and we work across 3 levels: the strategic level, the operational level, and the implementation level. At the strategy level, we have a steering group, as just mentioned, of those organizations providing inputs in sorts of what would help them, and how our advocacy efforts supports the whole sector in delivering change. We also have the sort of operational level. This is more the sort of coordination unit, the sort of day-to-day function, and we were organized around sort of 3 areas. We have the sort of 5 working areas that sort of provides the backbone to what the GPA does. If you haven't read it, I do recommend you read the global plan for action, which identifies the sort of key concerns that needs to be addressed in delivering change, and they're around planning and coordination, policy advocacy and outreach, innovative finance and funding, technical expertise and capacity building, data research and evidence. So everything we do is based on sort of delivering and challenging those concerns. We also support with task forces, looking at what is happening in this space. How can we support a number of colleagues that are working on particular topics and bring sort of sector-wide solutions together. We presently have task forces on e-waste and cooking. Hopefully we'll be able to inform others that we'll also be having a decarbonisation task force very shortly with Greening the Blue, so do look out for that. And we also have a number of programs that are sort of supporting this space, which I'll talk about very briefly in a moment, which is the Decarbonising Humanitarian Energy Multi-Partner Trust Fund, also known as the DHE. We also have the roadmaps for energy access in displacement settings, and the Solco project, which is all about solar electric cooking partnership. So as I mentioned, the DHE really is about providing a sort of country-wide approach to decarbonising the humanitarian response. What we do here is using existing solutions, bring them together in a package, which includes UNITAR as the overall sort of coordinator, using UNDP's technical team in Copenhagen, green energy team, should I say, and they look at the 7-step process for identifying the energy needs at a facility and how that can potentially transition to solar hybrid solutions with or without batteries and diesel backup. And what we've seen in the past, really, with the sort of decarbonisation efforts of our partners, is that we fly in experts and we fly them out. There's no real sort of transfer of knowledge either way, from sort of in-country expertise and back from the international. So we acknowledge that there is a need to have in-country coordination. So we have the pleasure of NORCAP support in providing, a in-country coordinator along with national experts to actually do the on-ground work in terms of energy audits, energy assessments. And we actually have a technical mission at this moment in time in Nigeria that is sort of kicking this process off. The idea of this program is to support our energy transition partners to reduce their energy consumption and costs around diesel usage. This is also looking at the opportunity to improve the access, sort of private sector engagement. So rather than having 1 or 2 agencies coming to the market with 1, maybe 2 solar projects in a country, we're looking at sort of bundling those together around geographic regions to deliver economies of scale, but also make it more attractive for private investment. There's also an opportunity for bundling, looking at other financial solutions. For instance, how do we use the environmental attributes associated to these projects? Normally they're too small and too costly administratively to look at sort of carbon financing and carbon credits. But if we bundle those together, what does that look like? So we are working with partners to see how that could do. But I think the biggest thing that really the partners are really looking at is, if we are decarbonising the humanitarian response, what opportunities does that give to improve energy access to the displaced and local host communities by, battery swapping measures, extending, wires to, schooling, education facilities and so forth. So that is a big part of what we're doing. And again, also looking at trying to get some evidence to advocate for, more money and more expertise in this space to support more partners to deliver, reduced carbon usage, carbon production. So And then also, I just want to sort of quickly mention the work that we're doing with on the solar electric cooking partnership. This really is a sort of mix of a number of organizations looking to transition, 250,000 households to solar electric cooking, in 8 countries by the end of 2027, leveraging around 100 million US dollars. They are country programs. I'm pleased to say the first one launched in Uganda, and that one is being managed by Mercy Corps. So thank you to colleagues that they're pushing this project, and it's aligned with their CERP. The idea is that the project is to bring partners together to really sort of leverage climate financing and other financing opportunities to deliver this change. And hopefully there will be a significant launch at the IEA's Summit on Clean Cooking for Africa on the 14th of May. Sadiq, next. Yep. There's a very sort of brief overview of the sort of challenges that we're facing, some of the work that we're doing on there. Is there anyone have any questions in the chat, or anyone like to raise their hand?
Thanks so much, Mark. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, so we can move on, but rest assured there will be many more opportunities to come into the discussion. So great, thank you so much, Mark. I'll now continue with a presentation of the third program that Mark just mentioned that is hosted by the GPA. Also happens to be the one that I'm managing, and it's called READS and stands for Roadmaps for Energy Access in Displacement Settings. And I think it's a good segue into setting the scene for our session, or for the content of the panel discussion shortly. But in a nutshell, the READS program is a research program which is developing 10 country-specific roadmap reports, in which it really tries to summarize what the energy situation is in context of forced displacement in the given country. What we do is we try to present a bit of a stakeholder mapping, looking at who's working on the who's working on the topic within the context, what are some of the best practice projects, and then looking very specifically, where are the opportunities to build on existing work and also replicate and scale it, either within the same country or potentially elsewhere. We so far have 3 reports that we've published, all focusing on the context of East Africa, so Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. But we're also currently working on 2 reports focusing on the context of the Middle East, in Jordan and Lebanon, and 2 other reports on Ethiopia and Nigeria. And yeah, READS is implemented by the GPA, but we're lucky to partner with a local partner in each of the contexts that we work in. And so far, we've collaborated with Practical Action, Mercy Corps, SNV, and NRC to produce these roadmap reports, and crucially also to work on different stakeholder engagement activities. And the READS program is funded by the IKEA Foundation. Next slide, please. Just to say very quickly that we are not an extensive research program that has, we don't really have the mandate to do our own extensive primary data collection, but instead we really try to not reinvent the wheel and work very closely with partners who are actively working in this space to use the data that is available or that they have produced through assessments or studies, bringing it all together in one place to make it more accessible to the wider sector. We work closely also with associate researchers in each of the contexts who themselves have been affected by forced displacement, and also leverage their networks and expertise. And the roadmap reports, again, really try to identify the main barriers when it comes to sustainable energy access in displacement settings, and then crucially also what is already being done and what else can be done to address these gaps, and highlight specific opportunities for both partnerships and collaborations, as well as for projects to be funded. And just next slide, please. I think you can skip this, Sadiq. Thank you. Just to set the scene for the East Africa context, and this is also, I think, what we'll be highlighting in our panel discussion shortly. So again, we focused on 3 countries so far. I won't go into too much detail, but basically in Kenya, there is a camp policy in which there are 2 main camps in Kakuma in the northwest of the country and in Dadaab. in which, and also, of course, many urban refugees in Nairobi. Although there have been changes in the policy recently with an increased move towards a settlement approach and increased economic inclusion, there are also still significant restrictions on both employment and freedom of movement. But what we've seen very much in our research is how strong actually the private sector is in Kakuma, and not just larger established firms, but also many refugee and other community-led organizations or companies as well. And in Rwanda, there are 5 camps across the country. We see pretty high levels of social inclusion into different social services, and also things like relatively high access to financial services, and equally increased many different private sector initiatives with support of different local companies working in displacement settings. In Uganda, Uganda hosts a very large number of displaced people, and what's interesting about that context is that the displaced people live alongside the host communities in integrated refugee settlements, mostly in the north and the West Nile region, as well as in the southwest. And I think Uganda has often been heralded as having a very progressive and welcoming policy framework in which refugees have quite similar rights to Ugandan citizens. And as mentioned before, there's or was it 2 years ago even, the Ministry of Energy produced a sustainable energy response plan for refugees and host communities, which is quite a flagship policy in terms of really taking into account the energy needs of displaced communities alongside with nationals. I think there's a lot of that really brings a huge opportunity to promote energy access work. But I think in practice also, of course, there have been different factors that has led to a slower implementation. But that's just a very quick whirlwind tour of the 3 contexts that we're looking at, in case some of the audience members aren't as familiar. Before we launch into the topic of energy, I'd like to get your thoughts, exactly the poll please, on what is the greatest barrier to building markets for energy products and services in displacement settings? And just so you know, we would like you to select one, but I am aware that it's a bit of a trick question in the sense that, as you will probably see from reading through the different options, there are many different competing factors, but it'd still be an interesting thought exercise to get your perspective on what stands out to you as one of the key challenges. So I'll let you take a moment to read through the options and select. Give everyone another second, a bit more time. Great, maybe, yeah, if you could please submit your answer and then we can see what our audience thought. So what's the greatest barrier to building markets for energy products and services in displacement settings?
Sorry, Megan, should I close the poll now?
Please do.
Okay.
Interesting. And we do have a clear favorite, that being high upfront costs of energy products and low ability to pay customers. And tied to that very closely is the lack of access to finance for both companies and customers. Great. Well, if we can move to the next slide, please. Indeed, as I sort of hinted at before, I think from our research, it became very clear that there are indeed several different barriers that crop up in all the contexts that we looked at when it comes to energy access in displacement settings. And I'll start with just the simple kind of availability barriers. So what we tend to observe is that there is a lack of high quality energy products and services. And by that, we really mean more highly efficient energy products, for example, solar-based solar home systems for lighting, for example, or improved stoves or e-cooking solutions. Those tend to be fairly limited in the context that we looked at. And instead, there's a variety of lower efficiency products that were either just distributed by NGOs or of UN agencies, but also sometimes they're just available on the market. But often, for example, for solar products, we see that there's not not much adherence to certain quality standards, and also there's widespread use of things like candles or disposable battery torches or kerosene, and no access to lighting, or sometimes people have access to generators, but and particularly also for clean cooking, the use of biomass is extremely widespread, with firewood and charcoal being the main fuels, and being very common to cook with freestone fires and like clay stoves. So yeah, another issue with that is that we see that there's often no repair services for these products. So then, particularly if it was distributed by an NGO or a UN agency, those products don't tend to get used very long because they'll end up breaking, and there's no way to get them repaired. So what we've been trying to encourage, and we see a lot of other organizations working in this space, is to engage with the private sector to have solutions that might be available in like urban or peri-urban areas, to come for those companies to also consider displacement settings, refugee camps and settlements as markets, and to really build up their operations there and start selling their products. And I think we can see that there's definitely been a shift with increased private sector engagement, but I'd still say that it's a more nascent phenomenon, at least some of the contexts. That's kind of the summary of availability issues. I think as our audience rightfully said, affordability issues are definitely, I think, a huge barrier to sustainable energy products. Many of the more kind of higher efficiency products like e-cooking solutions or larger solar home systems, they come with very high upfront costs. And that is coupled with often a relatively low ability to pay for households. And of course, within the same like setting, there's some households that have even lower ability to pay, which makes these kind of more sustainable, higher efficiency solutions very difficult to obtain. And access to finance is also not always easy to gain access to. There are limited availabilities to or limited formal institutions like banks or microfinance institutions. There's wider spread use of village and savings loans associations, for example, and other like more informal savings groups. But we see that again, compared to the need for access to finance, the solutions are relatively limited still. And even though many organizations or companies we see are offering their products on credit basis and using installments, that is often a challenge because people living in displacement settings often are actually quite mobile, and that makes it then difficult to pay back a longer term loan on a product. We've also come up with a third category of main barriers, and that is just simply sometimes cultural preferences and a lack of familiarity, perhaps with some of the more efficient energy products and services. And again, I'm thinking particularly of clean cooking solutions. Sometimes people just don't like the way that food tastes or the cooking process that comes with a different, newer, or less familiar cooking solution. And sometimes there's also a lack of awareness of the cost effectiveness of one of these solutions. People might initially just see and think of the upfront cost, but not realize that in the long run, the more efficient solution would also entail significant cost savings. And yeah, which leads to the fact that in the end, people with relatively low incomes also end up spending quite high amounts on energy products and solutions and services that aren't as efficient, and ultimately end up being very expensive. So that is a summary in a nutshell of some of the key barriers, and we'd love to jump into them in a bit more detail in our panel discussion. But before we move to our panel discussion, I'd like to open the floor for any initial kind of reactions or questions. Yeah, before we move to the next part. We have a few comments in the chat. Someone, Priya, who was involved in the development of the SERP in Uganda, and yeah, she really affirms the issue of ability to pay and also the ongoing cost of burning fuels. That sounds really interesting about the study, Priya. If it's available, please do feel free to share it. Yeah, and then a comment also about ability to pay also being relevant within the wider humanitarian context. Thank you. Any other questions or any reactions at this point? If not, we have a question for you. So if we can have the next poll, please. So to set the scene for our panel discussion in a little bit more detail, my next question to you is, what do you think the greatest challenge for refugee and other community-led enterprises is when selling energy products and services? And you can see a range of issues below. And similarly, as you may have guessed already, it's probably not just one, but if you can try and identify what you think is the most significant challenge. And while I'm letting other people think, Anais, I just saw your question. I'm happy to send the full list. But yes, so our published reports are in Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya, but we're also working on reports in Jordan and Lebanon, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. And then we have 3 more countries that we'll be looking at a later stage, which, to be honest, aren't fully defined yet. But yeah, also taking, we would definitely also be interested in people's opinions on other countries to be focusing on, as I know there are very many. But yeah, happy to share more details on it if you're interested. And thanks, Priya, so much for sharing the study that you'd mentioned. That sounds really interesting. Great, I'll let everyone take a few more seconds to fill out the poll. Great, Sadiq, I think you can close it. And then if we could see the results, please. Interesting. Okay, so we have a favorite of low ability to pay of customers, which actually wasn't what I was expecting. Access to finance came up very highly, as well as issues around accessing electricity, both affordability and availability, and then also the topic of the lack of ID documentation, sometimes in different like regulatory or permitting issues. Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your opinions. And with that, I'd like to hand over to hear a bit more about the opinions of our panelists today. If you can move to the next slide, please. Great. And with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our 3 panelists. So we have Vincent, who is the founder of Green at Mind, based in Kalo Bay settlement in Kakuma. We have Renisha, who's the Associate Energy Officer at UNHCR sub-office in Kakuma. And we have Chiara, who's a Senior Technical Advisor of the Energy Track Team at Mercy Corps. It's great to have the 3 of you today. If I may ask you to switch on your cameras, and yeah, really looking forward to our conversation. So I'll start out with a question for Renisha. So Renisha, you work for UNHCR, and yeah, you're based in Kakuma. I know from my last visit to Kakuma that there's a lot of interesting different companies and private sector initiatives happening there. And I was wondering if you could set the scene by telling us a little bit about some of the examples of refugee and other locally led energy businesses in Kakuma and Kalo Bay area, and also talk a bit about the kind of support that you see organizations providing to these businesses.
Thank you so much, Megan. So just a little bit background on Kakuma. Kakuma has been there for around 30 years. So it's a protected settlement. And currently we have more than 280,000 people of concern living here. So you can imagine the volume, like how big we in terms of population size we're talking about. So since Kakuma has been a protected settings, I think it has also been a hub for a lot of entrepreneurship activities, both from the refugee entrepreneurs as well as the locally led NGOs. To name a few, so in terms of access to electricity, we have a 20 kilowatt peak solar mini grid system, which is owned, operated and maintained by a Congolese refugee. I think that is such a classic and good example of by the people and for the people, because this mini grid serves around 200 households and businesses in Kakuma where it is located. We have, in terms of access to clean cooking, we have Vincent, who is already on the call, so he's going to talk more about the refugee-led production of clean cook stoves. We also have entrepreneurs who are looking to produce briquettes made out of waste materials, again, trying to serve the community that they live in. And not to forget that even on the part of the e-waste value chain creation, which is often a forgotten topic, we have few local NGOs who are trying to support the value chain, let's say, we have one, which is a Kenyan-led local NGO, which is trying to, it's a private sector, semi-private. It's offering repair and maintenance services for solar products ranging from your solar panels to your freezers and so on, which I think complements beautifully to this ecosystem. But in addition, we also, I also want to point out that I think Kakuma is one of the settlement which has a private-led investment that led to a solar mini grid that's 541 kilowatt peak. It's one of the largest private-led solar mini grid in displacement setting, which is serving around 3,000 households in the area. So clearly showing the innovations that has been done in the clean cooking front, the access to electricity front, and so on. And to answer your second question about the ecosystem, about the different organizations, I think, so here in Kakuma, UNHCR as the lead organization is working towards coordinating the sector under the KISIDIP, Kakuma's Kalobe Social Integrated Development Plan, so under which there is SDG Goal 7, universal access to electricity, energy. Under that, we are coordinating the entire sector to kind of streamline our effort. So what does that mean in practice is really bringing the private sector, the county government, working with the county government, the other NGOs and so on under one roof, and to regularly do knowledge exchange, as well as work together on how the sector is moving forward and how we can complement each other. I think that is the word, the complementarity, and not to hinder each other's progress. So that's the pathway we are taking. But along with that, there are different NGOs, like for example, the SNV is they have a program called Market-Based Approach, where they are trying to de-risk the environment for private sector, and they do it by using different approaches in different phases, from reserve-based subsidies to the current phase, which focuses on communication and marketing activities. At the same time, we have GIZ, which is working towards capacity building, or also helped in the upscaling of the 541 kilowatt peak mini grid that I mentioned. So I think our sector is really an amalgamation of different actors, and we are trying to complement each other and then move together as a sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Renisha, for that overview. And now it'd be great to hear from one of the refugee-led businesses. Vincent, could I hand over to you to tell us a little bit more about Green at Mind? Particularly, we'd love to hear about your journey to set up your social enterprise. And can you maybe talk a little bit about any support mechanisms that you experience, or also any challenges that you encountered with setting up Green at Mind?
Yes, thank you so much, and good evening. My name is Vincent Ubelin. I'm the founder of Green at Mind. We are located in Kalugoi settlement, and basically we are specialized in clean cooking technologies, where we are producing clean cook stove from waste of drum and waste of plain sheet. And I got the initiative when I was working with SNV as a former staff in 2020 during the COVID time, where SNV were supporting a market-based access project, which is called BEAR. The project was supporting private partners dealing with clean cooking and clean lighting. And as a local capacity builder, I realized there were a lot of gaps, especially in providing access to clean cooking technologies for refugees with a low level of income, as the majority of refugees with a low income cannot afford to purchase the high cost of available clean cooking technologies on the market. So it lead most of them to use firewood and stone which is forcing a majority of women engage in this which is
Sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Vincent. I think your 1 second. I think your connection was a little bad these last few sentences. Do you mind? Can you try again now? Sorry, can you repeat the last few things you said?
Yeah, I was saying I decided to come up with a clean cooking technology which was affordable to the income level of refugees living in Kalubey settlement, and this was basically to provide an alternative to the open fire and the lack of access to clean cooking technologies. So we are bent on offering a full cycle of clean cooking technologies where we can offer clean fuel and also clean cooks alongside our market. Yeah, so basically this is what motivated me to come up with mind with the main idea of seeing no women with a victim of respiratory disease from populations. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Vincent. Chiara, I'd like to ask you a question around Mercy Corps' work. Could you please provide us with an overview of Mercy Corps' initiatives to support resilient energy solutions? And also, I know you do a lot of work on linkages with energy with access to finance. So if you could speak a little bit about that.
Thank you, Megan, of course, and good to see you, everyone. So, to answer your question, Megan, I would start by framing a little bit the work that Mercy Corps does in the energy space, starting from our global strategy. Indeed, in 2022, Mercy Corps published its Pathways to Possibilities, which is our 10 years strategy, where we define our commitment to support communities in their pathways to resilience through 4 main objectives, which actually are food security, water security, economic opportunities, peace and good governance. And I wanted to start from the global strategy because from the strategy is already crystal clear that we don't actually see energy as a standalone outcome, but instead we do see energy as a key catalyst and enabler for achieving all the 4 objectives within our strategy. Within this framework, I would say that our approach to energy access is really as usual for a humanitarian organization, meaning that it is really rooted into market oriented principles where indeed access to finance play a key enabling role. And the vision, such a market-oriented vision is actually based on the recognition of the fact that if we want to support communities along the entire pathways to resilience, so from the coping stage with emergency up to thriving, we really need to look at energy as the complex market system that it is, where once again access to finance play a key role. And why? Because I mean we've been discussing, and today we saw the results from the poll that affordability from a humanitarian to a development perspective is still the biggest barrier to preventing sustainable access to quality energy systems. So the inability of communities to pay for the high upfront cost of the technology coupled with the limited financing options that I have access to is preventing essentially the private sector to invest and provide energy access services in humanitarian settings. So we can say that the affordability is also reflected negatively in limited availability of quality renewable energy system. And within this framework, the role that Mercy Corps aims to play is not replacing the private sector in providing energy access services to communities, but supporting the private sector to expand their operations their outreach to the most vulnerable segments, communities and segments of communities that we work with. To this end, as part of our energy work, we did develop tailored, and we are also supporting local financial service providers to develop tailored financial products that can range between the most common pay-as-you-go, result-based finance mechanism, supply and end user subsidies, up to more maybe innovative crowdfunding, carbon finance, and up to leveraging private sector equity and concessional loans. I think it's important to say that I'm like mentioning a number of different instruments. Most of the time, two or more of these instruments come together within and complement each other within the same intervention. I think that a very good example of this complementarity between financial instruments is Sustain, which is a program that we are implementing in Uganda with Oxfam in partnership with Oxfam and Care, and that builds on the experience that we had with Ampere, that is kind of the previous phase of Sustained, and is a program aiming at increasing access to quality energy off-grid systems in refugee settings, where a number of different financial instruments come in to support the private sector to establish their own operations and community to address the affordability barriers. So, for example, we implemented a result-based finance mechanism to select the private sector and like this is a very effective mechanism according to our experience, also to ensure that the private sector meets some preset quality standards in the delivery of their service. So not only in terms of quality of the technology, but also quality of the post-sale services provided. And is also the way we are essentially channeling end user subsidies through supply side subsidies, meaning that we are essentially using supply side subsidies to partially lower the final price of the technology for the end users. On top of it, of course, so within Sustain, we also have the component of strengthening the capabilities of financial institutions. So we are supporting financial service providers, local financial service providers to develop their own products tailored on the needs of refugees, to somehow synchronize the financial capabilities of the community with the operational capacity of the financial service providers themselves and the risk appetite of the private sector.
Thank you so much, Chiara, for that really interesting overview. I'd like to now come back to the summary of the main kind of availability, affordability, and also acceptability issues. And Vincent, I wanted to ask you, from your perspective when working with customers, what do you see as the main affordability, acceptability, and availability gaps? And how do you work to overcome these issues to make sure that even customers with different income levels or particularly low income levels also can access sustainable energy?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think one of the most important aspects we should clarify in terms of affordability, accessibility, and availability of energy solution is the low income of the end user of the product we are providing on the market. You find most of them are living with a low rate of revenue, which cannot allow them to purchase the available alternative on the market. And this is one of the biggest challenge we are facing, especially for us who are in business, providing clean energy solution. And then the other element is also the insufficient financial capital for the local producer, like for refugee-led organization. You find that most of the time we are coming up with our own initiative, which has not enough support in terms of funding. And you find also the market sometimes it's bigger than our financial capacity to meet the demand on the market. And this is one of another gap we should align. And then also we have a limited information about the consequence of the use of unclean cooking solution. Most of time, refugees, the majority of refugees are coming from different backgrounds, and they don't have the same understanding on why they should use a clean cooking technologies, why they should use a clean lighting. For them, they find like it's normal to continue living the same kind of life they had where they are coming from. And then you find the reality in the host country is a bit different from the reality from the home country. But also the consequences are there in terms of health, in terms of environmental issues. And then you find information are not living within the community. And then we also have the gap in terms of importing material for the production, especially for raw material. Like for us in Kakuma and Kalubei, we all import our material from outside the camp. And then when you find yourself facing a challenge of low income or a challenge of limited financial capacity, it cannot allow you to purchase your raw material outside the camp. Now, for Green at Mind, the enterprise I'm leading, to overcome this challenge mentioned above, one of the things we have decided to use local material at 8% of our production, so that we cannot depend on outside for the main raw provide what is really necessary for the community. And then the second aspect is also the variety. We have decided to come up with a variety in terms of design and also variety in terms of size of the stove we are producing. We have different type of design to give a chance to our customer to use what they need in terms of their preference. And then also we give a variety in terms of size of the stove, so that even if you have less than like 500 Kenya shillings, you can also get a stove in the same level with someone with 1,000 Kenya shillings. So we adapt our design according to the income level of the user, so that the majority of them can get access to the clean cooking technology. And then we are also on the community awareness, especially on the consequence of using unclean cooking technologies, the consequence in terms of health, the consequence in terms of deforestation for the environment. And we are more to support within our community a project. We are more to support a project which is really coming from the community. So we have designed a program within Green at Mind, which is supporting community-based energy project, where we can train youth within the community, and then they come up with a project which is really energy-based project in line with SDG 7 and 13. So basically, this is the scenario with Green at Mind in Cameroon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vincent, for that. That's so interesting to hear again about the huge variety of different kind of solutions and different challenges that you're addressing that way. And yeah, really cool to hear also about your youth, the courses you're doing with youth. Maybe you can touch upon that in the next question. But right now, I'd like to ask Chiara. Maybe Chiara, can you talk a little bit about Mercy Corps' work with, as you mentioned, you have a strong focus on market systems development, market-based approaches. What are the kind of like lessons that you've taken from those about how to address these availability, accessibility, and affordability challenges? And is there anything that the wider sector can learn from previous projects? And yeah, how can we contextualize those models for larger scale impact?
Thank you, Megan. This is actually a super interesting question, and the answer potentially could last very long time. But I'll try to be brief. I think so. The very first key successful criteria for market-based energy intervention that comes to my mind while answering this question, I think I can be summed up in a single sentence, which is really going beyond energy. And what I mean is that, like, we spoke even at the beginning of this panel that ensuring long-term sustainability of energy access intervention in the humanitarian space has been one of the biggest challenges that we all have met. And we do believe that there is no sustainability, there cannot be sustainability and therefore no successful implementation without a vision on energy access that actually goes beyond the delivery of energy service. And in our vision, indeed, and I think that the strategy that I briefly presented before mirrors quite well this vision. Energy is a catalyst for valued economic opportunities and better living conditions for the communities we work in. And in other words, we think that once secured, energy access must be leveraged to create income-generating opportunities and ensure access to basic services, which are the actual incentives for the community to rely on high-quality services. And this power of energy access, of generating income, is also key to increase the creditworthiness of communities with private sector and financial institutions, which is in turn essential to increase access for them to the technology. So I think that one of the key factors while designing market-based approaches for energy access is identifying the different segments of the target. So distinguishing between households, productive use of energy, and businesses to try to understand a bit what are the market dynamics that an increased energy access can unlock for a better sustainability of the entire interventions. In more concrete terms, what we tend to do is to implement energy access interventions where our programmatic presence allow us to create synergies with programs on other sectors. Water and agriculture comes to my mind, and or where we can leverage partnerships with other organizations implementing programs that the same way can on one side benefit from increased access to energy brought by our interventions, but on the other side can ensure stronger demand activation and stimulation. And this has been, I think, one of the, has been for sure a guiding principles for our Enter Energy program, but also one of the key factors for success of the program that is now about to inaugurate in May, at the end of May, the very first commercial mini-grid in a refugee camp in Ethiopia under the new regulatory framework. And this couldn't be possible without a stronger synergy with whatever is related to the productive use of energy. So without leveraging on the power of energy to generate income. A couple of other key factors that are quite crucial in developing market-based interventions for energy access are evidence. Evidence is really the backbone of any sort of market-based model, and sometimes generating evidence can be not easy as expected. The assessment of ability and willingness to pay comes to my mind in this sense. Many challenges related to that, quite a pivotal criteria to design successful interventions. And again, like quite challenging in some contexts is where, for example, the financial literacy is very low. On top of that, like the other key challenge when it comes to evidence is the fact that usually in the attempt to generate qualitative and reliable and meaningful evidence, we often meet financing gaps. So we really need to be sure to integrate this evidence piece within ongoing interventions that can allow us to somehow collect the evidence, not only to year and to adapt the programs during their own implementation, but also to somehow set the ground for the development of scale-ups and replications. Last but not least, criteria is, I would say, an adequate allocation of resources, and I specifically refer here to time. I think it's important to keep in mind that sustainable energy access interventions often require behavioral and systemic change, which cannot be achieved within the constraints of very tight implementation frameworks. And also in this case, sometimes these require quite big advocacy efforts that are though really pivotal to implement programs that are that achieves the results and are sustainable over time.
Thanks so much, Chiara, for those really important points. Renisha, going over to you about looking at market-based approaches. I think sometimes there are issues around different income levels and ability to pay of within the same community. And I think there's criticism often that's brought to market-based approaches that they might be more beneficial for community members with higher incomes. And Vincent himself also mentioned that they address this topic by ensuring that there's different product sizes. But I'd be curious to hear from you. How do you think that we can ensure that market-based approaches are inclusive and benefit all members of displaced communities?
Thank you so much, Megan. But before I answer that question, I really wanted to say, like, I agree everything that you talked about, Chiara. We have seen first-hand experience. And if I may add, the part about energy becoming an enabler, we see it every day from how a social institution once solarized, it becomes the boom, the marketplace becomes the it place. And all of a sudden, the system that you design is so little as compared to the demand. So it's so real that it's always a beauty to see it happen, but of course it also has its counter effect. And maybe one last thing to add to that, which we really try to advocate for, is this local capacity building, because we saw it also firsthand that when there is local capacity, whether it's a solar or it's repair clean cook, so we really saw like a very positive trend in the long-term upkeep of that particular services. So just wanted to add this quickly. And now to move to the questions about how do you ensure inclusivity is, I think the first and foremost thing when we talk about displacement setting that I think we need to understand is we are not talking about a homogeneous setting. Like any town, like any village that we all live in, or a city, there is a lot of heterogeneity in terms of vulnerability, in terms of access to resources, in terms of access to opportunities, and so on. So having that in mind already links back to your question about, yes, we have now different willingness to pay or ability to pay. So I think when you come with that mindset of not a homogeneous system, but rather heterogeneous, I think you are more open to then also addressing it. And what we have seen from the field itself is there are different solutions that we have seen that have worked from the field. The first and foremost is if you want to be very inclusive, always involve the community. That means even before you start the project, have a community dialogue. And I do understand this might not apply in every displacement setting, because as I mentioned before, some can be emergency, some can be protracted, some can be in between. So it might not apply everywhere, but wherever applied, please do consider first having the community dialogue, because the amount of good information that comes out is wonderful, because you are really then able to understand the heterogeneity in that community. Because also, I think when we talk about inclusivity, we need to also move away from just thinking about energy solutions as only technical. Solar is not just technical, cook stuff is not technical. There's a whole ecosystem associated with it. The willingness to, the consumer preference, the access to additional infrastructures, and so on. So I think when we talk about inclusivity, maybe first we start with really having the community, and second, we think of whatever we are implementing in the form of ecosystem, and or think of all the socio-economic factor that are actually going to either hinder or promote your implication of your technologies. And third thing that we saw in terms of specifically ability to pay that we saw worked on the ground was pay as you go for solar. So we saw that, for example, for the mini grids that I mentioned, the customers, they range. There are customers who will just pay 20 or 50 shillings, which is around 20 to 30 cents per week, because they can only afford to light one light bulb per week, and that's the amount they are willing to pay. And that works because it's pay as you go, right? So you pay, and then once that expires, you can put another 20 or 30 shillings. Or if you are a business, you can put a little bit more. I think those kind of innovative solutions that that allows you to pay at your level, that also really works. And also then I think the second thing that we see from the community that has worked is, I think I always say by the people for the people. So when we have entrepreneurs, or when we have, for example, O&M operators from the community, they are also able to identify the community that they are serving. So there's also this social capital per se. So you know, like paying and not paying is also very much related to the social trust that you have as a community. For example, what Vincent mentioned about the community where he's selling his cook stoves, that's the community he knows. So that's his social capital. So then he's also able to identify what could be the financial measures that this particular person might have. I think that also we have seen, we have heard a lot from the entrepreneurs that we have interacted with. I think these would be roughly some of the ideas that we have seen from the ground. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Renisha, for those really, really important and interesting points. I have more questions prepared for you, but I'm also aware just aware of the time, and also wanted to make sure that our audience has a chance to ask their own questions. And I see some comments in the chat. So I think we'll take a quick break now to ask our audience if they have anything that they would like to ask at this point, and then I'll wrap up with asking each of you one final question. But maybe audience, while you think about your questions, just to note that we had an initial question about asking whether there's been any landfill gas to energy projects implemented in displacement settings. And I have to admit, I haven't personally come across any, but maybe does anyone else on the call have anything to add on that point? Interesting issue for sure, probably something that we should be looking into. Where there's another comment about Trifinity Intelligence Consult that's developed an impact initiative called Trash to Cook scheme, and involves users using waste to boost their buying power. That sounds really cool. And they're basically they can then use that to pay for cooking gas. That sounds great. Princess Odiaka, if you don't mind, if there's like a link or something, we'd love to learn more about that initiative. To our dear audience, does anyone have any questions or comments they would like to raise now or address to any of the panelists?
Okay, just to weigh in a little bit on experience for humanizing energy in the vulnerable setting. The truth remains that there are high risks with smart clean cooking technologies. So why I say that is because, one, you might not be able to deliver sophisticated clean cooking technologies to such communities because they might not be able to pay for such technologies, right? That's one. Two, because it's a vulnerable community, I mean, in those displacement settings, just like the initial speaker said, it's not the normal setting of the rural communities, those that live on their own and all that. So these communities are going to be, their living sites actually temporal. So you might want to play safe by giving them the easy technologies like the improved cook stoves, right? Because again, they are going to move at some point and they'll carry such technology. So that's a little bit of risk, and you're not going to follow them to wherever they are relocated again. So, but then that's one of the things we do. So for my community and for some other places, we discovered that why cooking gas became so costly in Nigeria. We discovered that people started tilting back to firewood, not even improve cook stoves. They went straight back to firewood, right? And so we had to come up with this. So if you come to Nigeria, you already know that we have this culture of, what I say is a culture, but this lifestyle of disposing plastics anyhow, right? And so we encouraged people to start picking those plastics, no need of disposing. So there is a structure for waste management trainings and all that, and sensitization. And the beautiful thing is that we discovered that again, that the rural women are not only adopting this, even those in the urban cities are now also aggregating those waste. They no longer dispose it. So they know that those wastes are literal money, right? And they use it to pay for cooking gas services. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of ingenious for us. Yeah.
That does sound like such a good scheme and good idea. Again, Princess, thank you so much for sharing that. If there's a website or anything that we can learn a bit more details about the initiative, that sounds really interesting. As you say, plastic waste is also a huge challenge, and to be able to leverage that in order to promote also improved access to energy is fantastic. So thanks so much for sharing that. React quickly about your other points. Indeed, you're totally right. I think people living in displacement affected communities often are relatively mobile, and that means that there's the increased risk of taking on a product that comes with very high upfront costs. I think there's organizations and companies are experimenting with different ways to reduce that risk and to make the initial product more affordable. But again, just to acknowledge those very valid points. If anyone, I see one more question. What has been the most successful renewable energy technology in displacement setting? Solar mini grids. I think that it would be fair to say that the solar mini grid, particularly I'm thinking of the example Renisha mentioned in Calais settlement, is definitely the largest example that we have of, a very large scale renewable energy project that's able to really have a huge transformative effect of on the entire community, as we spoke about. Energy access really is an enabler and has so many cuts across all aspects of life in terms of quality of life, productivity, health outcomes, etc. And I think again, seeing the kind of boost, I guess, to different refugee businesses, and also to again the reliability of improved services for social institutions, and then also just access for households. Again, I think that is the largest scale project we can mention, but I think it's hard to narrow it down to one specific technology. Again, there's a lot of different interesting initiatives going on with improved cook stoves, but also with e-cooking specifically, still relatively small scale, but I think they could potentially have a huge transformative effect, and they also go hand in hand with increased access to electricity, particularly for e-cooking. But colleagues, I'll let panelists or anyone else, to be honest, if you'd like to jump in. Kara, I see your hands raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you, Megan. I think is an interesting question, and I think that again, the success of energy access interventions is, I would say, more related to the business model beyond them. Rather than on the specific technology, or at least the two things are really, really connected. So I think that the answer, I would say, that depends on the external conditions where we operate, meaning that there are settings where operating through a mini grid business model is I wouldn't say challenging, I would say almost impossible. And so we are forced to rely on different kind of technologies and different business models, but this kind of intervention might be very successful anyway. So I think that the choice of the technology and as a consequence of the business model really, really depends on the external conditions and on all the barriers that we meet in designing programs.
And Megan, if I also may add something to that, also what I mentioned in the beginning, the heterogeneity of the displacement settings, I think that plays a key role. So what everybody has already pitched in. If we look at specifically at Kakuma, we also have a market for solar home systems. At the same time, the mini grids that I mentioned, they are now planning to do a even bigger expansion because there is a higher demand. So I think there is a room for like both technologies, because there's a demand, like different willingness to pay and different ability to pay, and also different access to these resources. Like for example, when you think of Kakuma, we have 4 villages, Kakuma 1 to 4, let's think of them as villages. And Kalobe, we have another 3 villages. So then with the mini grid now, it can only go up to village 1 and 2 because of the transmission distribution line. So maybe on Kalobe, Kakuma 1 and 2, they might have only access to solar home systems because of this inaccessibility. So I think like what Kara and Megan also mentioned, there is a room for every technology because there is a price point that different people are willing to pay. And the same goes for clean cooking. I think e-cooking is great when it comes, but at the same time, I think at this stage, ICS have a huge potential in the market because it's the lowest form of investment that you can do, and the surrounding environment is already available for it. Because we also noticed, like with new fuels like ethanol, sometimes there were a lot of cultural connotations in some of the settings that we wanted to pilot. Or if you talk about e-cooking, then we needed the additional infrastructure of having the electrical installations, the electrical safety. There was like other components to think about. So I think at this point, I think everything has its own market. You just have to figure out which is your target audience, basically.
To both of you again for highlighting the importance again of the context dependency, the heterogeneity of different preferences and needs. But then also, I think that's a really important key takeaway from this this session, is that there are so many solutions out there, but also so many needs and preferences, and also kind of levels of ability to pay, and therefore there is room for all of them. And I think we as a sector really need to be promoting them all next to each other and kind of seeing organically how they fit in, and all end up again having that wider enabling effect. I'd like to now, slowly as our session is drawing to the close, move on to our last set of questions so we get a chance to hear from each of our panelists. So Kara, I'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about how do we collaborate with the private sector from a humanitarian and development actor perspective? How can we maybe kind of bridge the gap between different ways that these sectors work, and also promote kind of increased knowledge exchange?
Yeah, so like I would start by saying that the energy humanitarian sector has been traditionally lacking a cluster. So usually like energy at field level, maybe like it's hosted sometimes within the work cluster, but the coordination of different actors working within the humanitarian energy space remains somehow a challenge, especially considering the diversity of the diversity of the different actors involved in the sector. As you said, like the private sector very often speak a different language from the one that we do speak. Is a different mandate, and this mandate is also driven by other different principles. I would say that like these need to align language and increase coordination exists at all levels, meaning that even like among humanitarian organizations, there is still some work to do. It was very like interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a conference on resilience and climate resilience, and in the room there were a number of different organizations, and we were discussing about the meaning of climate resilience, and an insane amount of different definitions came up. And this is just to say that there is the very first step that we should take in order to align all our mandates is to start somehow understanding the different languages that we use. So delve deeper into the implications and nuances of our strategies, and trying to translate them into concrete outcomes, metrics, and activities so that we can all understand each other. I'm not saying that like this is enough to align the strategies, but at least to speak a common language. In the specific case of private sector, I think it's important also to recognize that like again the private sector is driven by different mandate, so like we need to understand the different needs and aspirations of such a different entity, and at the same time we have to support them in understanding our visions and approaches. I would like also to add that, like within this framework, once again, research and evidence play a key role, because really relying on evidence allows us to align priorities and to develop approaches that meet the real needs at community level. When I speak about evidence, of course, effective evidence include localization of evidence. Like there is no reliable evidence without systematic involvement of the local communities we work for and with. And just to close, I would say that another key driver for aligning the priorities, the strategies of private sectors and humanitarian actors are the sharing platform. Like within this broader framework, I think we all agree that the work that GPA is doing to increase coordination efforts among humanitarian entities is great. Luckily, the relevance of energy within the humanitarian space is growing, and so are doing events that create spaces for this kind of interaction. So, like, I think these are all great examples of how things are evolving from this point of view.
Thanks so much, Chiara, for that excellent closing point. Yes, as we know that as there is a diversity of really important and promising energy solutions, there are also a huge diversity of the organizations and companies and different actors who are working to promote them and to really ensure that they are complementary to each other. That's where we really need increased coordination. So thank you so much, Chiara. We'll keep it short because I realize that we're at time, but Renisha, last question to you. Can you talk about the enabling environment more generally? What do you think is needed to support, again, increased kind of cross-sectoral public-private partnerships, and also just generally support market-based approaches to scale up energy solutions?
Thank you so much, Megan. Since much have been already said, so I'll try to be very concise. I think the first is access to information, because when we talk about displacement setting, there are certain rules and regulations around camp access, and there is certain principles behind it. So those informations, I think without having those ground reality information, I think it's difficult to promote any kind of partnerships. The second would be the legal environment, because if we talk about, for example, the solar mini grid, there needs to be a clear legal framework on who owns the assets. When I do a distribution and transmission line after 10 years, do I own it? Do the county own it? If I want to price the electricity, what is the framework that defines how much can I charge my targets? So basically the legal framework around it. And access to finance, I think we have talked so much about it, but just to add one last point on access to finance is also the type of finance, because when we talk about international company accessing finance, or local Kenyan company access finance, or a refugee accessing finance within Kakuma, these are 3 different levels of financing needs and 3 different approaches. So I think they're also having something that is more broad, I guess would be very much discriminatory in the sense that these 3 agencies would have different access to these resources. So the access to finance also needs to be localized, stealing the word from Kyra. And I think with that, I'll just pass it back to you, Megan.
Thanks so much, Renisha, for raising all those important regulatory considerations. Great. And last but not least, Vincent, you get the opportunity to answer the last question. And again, it'd be particularly interesting to hear from your perspective as a refugee. enterprise. What do you think, what kind of investments do you think are needed to support refugee enterprises? And specifically, when you think of Green at Mind, what would you need to further scale up the production of the improved cook stoves and also being able to engage and train more youth? Over to you.
Thank you so much. I think I appreciate the intervention of Ranisha and also Clara in the last question and the explanation. But one thing I would like to mention is the legal compliance. As a refugee-led organization, we are facing one of the huge problems, which is access to documentation to allow most of our activity to be run officially. And this is where we have a lot of limit to access funding, to have a bank account, to expand our market. We are limited in terms of documentation. And I think one of the major things I should require is the support for refugee-led organization to acquire official documentation, but also the certification of our product. Sometimes we are offering a product coming from our initiative, serving the community, and then you find we have no access to have our product certified by the government, which is also very important because we need our product to be certified by the government so that we offer something which is recognized by the local government. Another element is also facilitate networking opportunities for refugee-led organization, and this is in the country level and also outside the country. This is it's basically to facilitate refugees to get access to international conference, events on clean cooking technologies, clean lighting, and renewable energy in general. It can help them to network with other organizations, learn from them, to get new experience, and also to know how they can improve their product on the ground. And then the access to finance, Ranisha talked about it at 3 different levels, and I would not like to come back on it. And then I would like to mention the fact that refugee-led organization and CBOs, the organization working directly with the community with a limited cost of logistics compared to international organizations and NGOs. So you will find like 80% of our funding are going straight to the beneficiary, which is not most of the time the same with international organizations where there is a lot of cost in terms of administration, in terms of logistics, which is using a lot of funds. So if we can see that gap to support funding starting from the lowest level, because it's going directly to the community, it will be a good strategy to support our activities. But then also currently there is the platform for carbon credit, and I don't know how a refugee-led organization can also get access to the platform at international level, specifically for carbon credit access. And then we have the market activation and market expansion outside the camp. I think it will also be another element that can make our enterprise to grow. Because if we can only sell our product within the community where we are living, then it may not have enough of impact outside, since for us we are a business and we also need to expand. And lastly, I would like to mention something on the risk explained on offering smart clean cooking technologies that may not be purchased by refugees because they are vulnerable in the community. I think refugees and other displaced population, they also need to use those smart clean cooking technologies. But then what we may need to do is to support those organizations to improve their technologies, to allow their users to have a pay-go model, even for clean cook store. Currently, we have only a pay-go model for lighting, and then if we can adapt our product with the pay-go system, it can allow most of the refugees to also use clean cooking technologies, and it will also help companies producing stuff to improve also their product. So I think this is where I would like to stop for the support and investment we need to support our enterprise and also other refugee-led organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent, for an excellent closing. And I think we can see there's so much potential and amazing work that's already been done by the refugee and also host community led the businesses, but there's also many more ways that we can work to support increased funding opportunities, support with the certification issues that you mentioned. So it's a very exciting place to be, I think, because there's a lot that is happening in this space, but there is also a plethora of different challenges that remain. But I'm hopeful that by promoting a variety of different solutions and also increased coordination among us, we will see wider impact. This was just the beginning of delving into a wider topic, but if you're interested in learning more, please get in touch with us. Sadiq has helpfully shared the different kind of links to stay in touch with the GPA, but also please feel free to contact any of the panelists if you'd like to learn more. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much on the behalf of the GPA, but also the panelists for taking part in today's discussion. I really enjoyed getting to hear from all of you, and hope that you have a good rest of the HNPW, and hope to interact again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Megan. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.